Hi there, Linda.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is, for those who don't know me, and for those who don't recognize me because they haven't seen me for a few years, then my name is Graham Turner, and I worked with Peter for something like 50 years. So Peter was a colleague and a friend of mine for, as I say, 50 years. And I'd have to include a few others here. There's Alan, of course. There's Linda, and Julie, not quite 50 years. And where's Bob? Oh, Bob's here.
Oh, Bob.
So
Hello,
there's a few old timers anyway amongst us. Now, if anybody wants to say a few words afterwards about Peter, or bring back some shared memories, or talk about the station, then please do when I've finished, and I'll try not to go on for too long. Firstly, on behalf of Patrina and Jeffrey, I'd like to welcome everyone here and thank everyone for coming, for attending today's commemoration of Peter Baird and his passing. It's 12 months since Peter experienced that tragic accident, and while Patrina and Jeffrey have spent the last week or so revealing his headstone in Wanganui, they thought it would be appropriate for people and friends, to colleagues, to come here and meet today. This was Peter's happy place, and I don't know anybody that I've known associated with Wellington Radio and this hill who I could associate that more to than Peter. It's also 31 years since, as of tomorrow, since Wellington Radio closed. Doesn't seem like 31 years to us who've worked here, but that's when it turned off its transmitters and closed its doors. And that was 82 years ago, 82 years of service to the maritime community. It was where Peter and Shirley raised their children, Patrina and Jeffrey, and also a goat. But I won't go into the goat story. There were something like 10 families who lived on this hill, so it's a community base with all those families, those people working at this particular station. And there was also a group of reprobates who lived in a single quarters, who just in this spot here.
I remember them.
You remember them?
I wonder who they were.
Well, you can tell by the voices. So it was a community that got on extremely well together. We had parties. It was party central, and those parties were fancy dress or some sort of theme. Every sort of, I don't know, seemed like a week or a fortnight. But there were tremendous parties, and we didn't upset the neighbours. And I have got photographs to prove all this, but I left them at home. From a professional perspective, Peter's career started in December 1967. He was living here in the single quarters during the Wahine storm, which was of course the 10th of April 1968. And unfortunately, there are memories that Peter had and expressed to myself about that particular day, but unfortunately I can't quite remember the whole facts. But I know it wasn't just a ship out there that was in difficulty. It wasn't just the storm damage around the city that happened. It was also storm damage to this particular station. And I know that they had problems in communicating between the station and downtown and the various services. Peter was involved in that as a young fellow. He was only been here for a few months, and he was a sort of a gopher between the station and I think it might have been the manager's office, where he was, where they had phone access to the city and headquarters. We're all influenced by, directly or indirectly, by events in our lives, and that event, I think, influenced Peter's interest in the station and the radio community as such, because he became Wellington Radio's historian. And I've been going through some of Peter's stuff that we are looking after at the moment, just taking care of, and reading through his notes that that he wrote. It's fairly common knowledge that the Wellington Radio itself started in the General Post Office downtown Wellington in 1911. It says on the plaque over there 1912. The plaque, I'm afraid, is wrong because Peter says it was 1911, so Peter's right. That was fairly common knowledge, but it moved up to the hill here in 1913, and the hill was called Mount Itako back then. It changed its name to Tinakora Hill, and since then it's been changed to Te Ahu Mairangi. I'll get it right. The station call sign, originally in 1911, I don't know, but Peter says that in 1913 it changed to Victor Lima Whiskey, for all you radio people that know this sort of stuff. And then in 1927 it changed to Zulu Lima Whiskey, where it stayed until the end of its working life. Wellington Radio was part of what they call the Commonwealth Area Scheme. And in researching this prior to today, I found that even Google didn't know much about it. But there are websites around like Ships Nostalgia that I discovered more information. But it was one I worked when I was at sea back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And it was part of what we call the Commonwealth Area Scheme. It was a long-range system. And through that, I discovered that I worked an old operator no longer with us called Maurice Earle, and another one called Chuck McLeod. So it's very likely that I would have worked Peter when I was at sea, and Lester, and even Bob and Alan. It's potentially quite possible I met all those guys without knowing it. But that was all Morse code. It was all Morse code until 1941. The radio telephone service wasn't introduced until 1941. Wellington Radio was the first to take that on board, followed by Auckland and Awarua shortly afterwards. One of the things about these stations is that they were involved in quite a number of tragic or important events throughout its history. One in particular was the 1931 Napier earthquake. That occurred on the 3rd of February 1931. And if you Google stuff about that earthquake, they will tell you mostly that the people involved was HMS Veronica, a naval sloop, and the Naval Communications Station in Auckland. And they won't say much about anything else. But two ships anchored out of Napier at the time of that earthquake. One was the Taranaki, which was a shore sailboat, and another one was the Northumberland, which was a Federal Steam Navigation or New Zealand Shipping Company vessel. Both those two vessels reported at the same time as HMS Veronica that an earthquake had taken place. And the radio officer of the Northumberland worked for 22 hours without a break, relaying information through this station to the authorities downtown. So this station played a major part in the rescue, but not the rescue, but the role of helping out the people of Hawke's Bay, until, of course, communications on landline were re-established. Other of the incidents that this station took part with are the Lermontov, remember the Lermontov, the Russian passenger ship, the Pacific Charger that ran aground at Bering Head, the Homedale, which became the Celtic Kiwi that sank 400 miles north of New Zealand, and the shark attack victim that took place in Campbell Island.
Don't forget the Gothic.
And of course the Gothic. Well, the Gothic was actually handled by Awarua.
No, I handled it at ZLW.
Did you?
Yes.
Well, the
Jack Ryan was
interesting.
standing behind me saying, "Can you do this?"
Well, the interesting thing about the Gothic was a shore saddle passenger vessel. It was only used for cargo this time. And out in the Pacific, it caught fire in the radio room and the bridge,
Yes.
which got burnt out. They had to steer backwards, astern, to cause the flames to keep forward until they put the flames out. They raised New Zealand by using what they call a windy emergency transmitter
Lifeboat.
on the frequency of 8364. Would you believe?
Yeah, got it.
The radio officer on that ship was a bloke called Roger Cliff. He was a friend of mine, and I was at Radio College in the United Kingdom with him, and he was a great soccer enthusiast, and we used to go to the local soccer matches and on a Saturday afternoon. So Roger Cliff was that chappie. So that's the Gothic.
Yeah. He said send slower because he borrowed a transistor radio from a passenger.
Yep.
And he had no BFO on that, of course, so
Right.
our CW had to be
Yep.
copied like there was no note to it.
Well, that transmitter was a windy thing. That's
Yes.
how it generated the power
It could
with a little
generate.
Morse key on the top.
Yeah, he couldn't receive.
And I used to test this quite every voyage,
Yeah.
and I used to get other people to wind it, and I would do the Morse. This was also, as an international station, we used to get contact from what we call DXs. Now, DXs are like amateur radios. They listen around the world to stations, and then they send off a letter or what they call a QSL card. And the QSL means have you received or could you acknowledge receipt of? And they would send the details of that communication to the station and ask us to write back and acknowledge. As manager of this station for the last 2 years, I used to do this, and I found it was somewhat onerous and time consuming, so I gave it to Peter to do, and he was more than happy to take that on board, and he did an excellent job, so much so that we got mentioned in an amateur radio magazine as one of the fairest and fewest of stations that would do that today. So it was nice to get an acknowledgement in that magazine. When the station closed in '93, and a number of us moved to the Maritime Operations Centre and Taupo Maritime Radio that took over the service. And that was, we carried on getting DXs writing with QSL cards to the station, and Peter carried on that service all the way through until he retired, which was another 20 years. I mentioned the Maritime Operations Centre and Taupo Maritime Radio because that took over the service, replaced Awarua, Wellington, Auckland and the Chatham Islands, but there was a number of personnel from those stations that moved sideways. That was Brendan Comerford, Tony Graham, Mark Janner, Alan Burgess is here, Stu Leslie, Kerry McCullum, Peter and myself. So Peter gave another 20 years of service to the maritime community. I also want to mention that another member who's here today, who stayed in Wellington Radio right to the very end, was Linda. Our dear Linda over there, Linda Fowler. She moved sideways to the Wellington Harbour radio station, Beacon Hill. And some years ago, and I can't remember exactly how long, there was a freighter cargo ship coming up the east coast of New Zealand, heading for Cook Strait, middle of the night, and the officer of the watch fell asleep. And that ship, when it got to a waypoint to change course to go to Cook Strait, didn't, and it kept on coming, and it was heading for the south coast. And it was only through diligence on Linda's behalf, he managed to wake up this fella on the bridge and get them to alter course at the last minute, that she prevented a major disaster. So kudos to Linda. Mustn't forget. All of these people took experience, they took knowledge, expertise into their respective roles. They created the foundations, set the standards, and established the levels of professional service that both Linda's operation and my operation and Alan's operation provided. And that's still going today. And it's one of the best stations, the Maritime Operations Centre, one of the best stations in the world for what we do and provide security and safety to people at sea. Peter was part of that, and it's undervalued by the New Zealand community, because most of the time you hear reports on the news of events taking place and you don't realise that these guys have all been involved in it. But finally, as the years have rolled by, so have a number of New Zealand Post Office coast station radio operators. I can recall the likes of Maurice Searle, Barry McCartan, Jeff Hansen, Fred Gates, Barry Ellison, Terry Cabana, Chuck McLeod, and then there was, my wife reminded me, Gordon Menschel was a gentleman, an absolute gentleman, and he's gone. Gordon Menschel, and he's gone now too. And there was also Brenda Glazier, Marilyn Lemberg, and Craig Ratton, and those guys never made 50. I think they were in their 40s or something like that when they passed on. There are probably others whom I haven't recalled, and so perhaps this might be an appropriate time to ask you all now to join me in having a minute's silence to reflect on those people of the past. Thank you, everyone. And now, Katrina would just like to play something.
Would anybody else like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. And yes, I'd like to remember Peter today. He was one of my earliest workmates. I came up the hill here fresh from Trentham Camp in 1967, December. And Peter had been here for 2 years, I believe. He's finished his training in 1965. So he was actually one of the guys I looked up to, even though he'd only been here a really short time. The Wahine incident was my trial by fire. It happened only 1 year after I joined the Coast Station Service, and it was a truly remarkable day. As Graham has already mentioned, we lost communications. We had a fire on a teleprinter. We had loss of telephone communication, so I believe the construction and maintenance guys, C&M branch, rolled a drum of cable down the hill to Bowen Street and connected up again, so we could key our transmitters at Himatangi, because that's where they were located. We had our local transmitters, but Pimatangi was the preferred option. We wanted to distance ourselves from the transmitters for good reason. So that happened, and the other major thing that happened that day was a big makakapa fell across the driveway at the bottom of the access road here, blocking the access for all staff either going home from Doggo or getting on duty at 7 a.m. So Frank O'Keefe barged into my room. I was living next door here, about 7 o'clock or 5 to 7 or something. He says, "Come to work, we need you." And that was the day the wahine went on Baird Reef, and I think I got the job of making tea.
Tea was the
Recognise
I
the
might
last.
have done something else more useful, I can't remember. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting day, and I remember that Beacon Hill handled the urgency on behalf of the ship, which was not permitted to put out a mayday according to the New Zealand Railways standing rules, because if a ship put a line on it, it would have salvage rights. NZR wanted to avoid that at all cost. And so, if you were there, Linda, you would have been handling that.
No, I was 3 years old.
Yeah, you weren't ready.
I do know from the logs at Beacon Hill that our radar, the onometer, which is what records the wind, went up to 190 knots.
Yes. Off the
So
scale.
yeah, off the scale, and
Yeah.
it was jammed on 190 knots.
Yep.
And the operator at Beacon Hill couldn't see anything, but the radar motor burned out on our radar at Beacon Hill, and on the ship they had to turn the radar off, and so they were coming in with no visibility, no radar, and their starboard prop broke and their port engine didn't work, so they were basically able to only go in a straight line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe Captain Robertson had ordered half speed ahead and was being driven by this huge southerly
Yeah.
coming into the entrance. He had no choice. He had no steerage. So essentially, their fate was sealed once they entered the heads. So that was a disaster. But he said he wouldn't cancel the sailing because it was a tradition to get through.
That's right.
So that was the way it was. I woke up that morning anyway, the walls of my room were going in and out like this, you know. And I looked out the window, and half the trees down here were topped off. Halfway level, there was like broken off by the wind. I looked out toward Eastbourne here. It was simply a white fury of foam all the way to Eastbourne and out to Tony. So it was just a tremendous, horrible day. And I always learned a big lesson from that. I think 52 lives were lost that day. 52 lives, yeah. So there's a memorial over here on the foreshore over here in Eastbourne, I think.
Yeah.
There is.
But there's also one around in
Seaton?
Yeah, Cobb Bay.
So that was 68. I think it was the following year, 69, the Gothic caught fire, MAUQ. And he put out a XXX on 8364, which I got. Maybe Aurua picked it up, but it was handed, I think it was maybe handled by us. I don't remember at the time, but I remember I was on HF1, 8 megs, and Jack Ryan standing behind me. I was kind of like a new trainee sort of thing still. And he stood behind me and he said, "Can you handle that?" And I said, "Yes, I'm fine." So he let me carry on. And so that was a good experience. They finally made, I think they went back to Littleton. They had sailed from Wellington and they had to go back to Littleton for repair work. But they did manage to put the fire out, and they remanned the ship and limped into Littleton. So that's,
Did it ever come here to Wellington? I'm sure I was like
of course it did. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, she sailed from Wellington.
No, after the fire.
I can't remember.
I was at the
Maybe.
radio inspectors and we went down to look at a ship
Oh, so
that
they
had
had-
a fire.
Probably.
Yeah.
I think
Probably.
Aaron, did you want to say a few words about it?
Yeah, probably. Anyway, I can recall one interesting joke which Peter played on me.
Old
He
hoo-hoo
said to
bugs?
me, I'm sorry?
Did it involve hoo-hoo bugs?
No, no hoo-hoo bugs in this one. I was on 1 p.m. shift and Peter was on 7 a.m. and he said, "Oh, Lester, somebody rang for you to, I think he's a ham radio guy. He wants you to call him back." I said, "Okay, I'll give him a call." On my ham, right? So, funny that. Anyway, I gave this guy a call back and it was Hutton's Lower Hutt. And I said, "Is there an amateur radio operator there that wants to speak to me?" And he says, I'll just check. And he said, no. And Peter was looking on. I was supposed to ask for a ham radio operator. So I completely botched that joke. All right, so I have a list of names here which I would also like to recall. Ken Wyatt.
Yeah,
Do you
Ken.
remember Ken?
Yes.
He should also be mentioned. He came through the training school the same year as Peter, 1965.
Yep.
Ken Wyatt went to, from Wellington Radio, who went to Auckland Radio, and then he went to Chatham Islands Radio, which I was managing at the time, and he unfortunately is now a silent P. He married a Chatham Islander, but he died some 20 odd years ago. So he was one of our great mates as well, workmates, and it's nice and appropriate to remember him. Also, Oscar Wilde.
That's good.
Oscar was famous in many ways.
Yes.
He said to me, "You know, I've got a tremendous torso, but look at my legs." He said, I'm doing a weight lifting exercise, but they forgot to send me the ones for my legs." So he said, "I've got a great, a chest, but no, my legs are no good." Maurice Earl, who's already been mentioned, Chuck McLeod, Sam Mulholland.
Yes, that was good.
He was a supervisor,
Yep.
and one of the relatively young supervisors at the time. Frank O'Keefe, Jeff Hansen, Terry Kelly.
Did he work here?
He worked here. In fact, we were working together. I resigned from Wellington Radio at an early age, thinking this is an old man's home, I've got to find something better. Who said that? And I went to work for NAC in their Torn Tape Centre on the Terrace here in Wellington, and I met up with Terry Kelly, which was good and bad. Anyway, we both resigned together and I got him into Wellington Radio. I rang Jack Ryan, I said, "Do you need another operator?" He said, "Yes, I'll bring him up." So that's how Terry Kelly became a radio operator in the coast stations. Jack Hughes, always referred to as Gentleman Jack on station. He was a very nice fellow. My phone's just gone off, just a moment. Here we go. Barry McCartan, I think's been mentioned. Peter Dunn, known as the Tinakori Yank.
That's it.
He had a voice that you could hear from Bowen Street. He transferred to ZLW Tauranga at the end of his, when he wanted to go. Jack Ryan, who many will remember, ex-superintendent ZLW, ZLB, ZLD. Silent key also. Dex Barrett, silent key. Gordon Mitchell, silent key. Barry Allison, silent key. Bob Inion, and Roy Hill, both of whom I flattered with right next door here. And there were many others. Maybe I should pause right now and anybody else who wants to add a few more names.
Aaron would like to have a few words.
I miss my granddad. He wasn't a man of too many words, but he was a man with a lot of thoughts, and it made him a really good listener. You could talk to him for a while about whatever, and eventually he'd get the thoughts out, and he had some good insights, and he had a good sense of humor. He also probably had my favorite laugh, which was this really kind of genuine raspy guffaw, which would get followed by a lip smack and then kind of noise, which was really how you knew he was in a good mood. You knew he was happy with that. Yeah, so I miss my granddad, and I miss hearing his thoughts. I miss hearing his laugh. But the fact that we did get to hear it so much, I like to think, means we made him happy a lot. And yeah, that makes me pretty happy too.
I can qualify that because Peter used to talk about you quite a lot. And so yeah, He was very close to you.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. We got up here early this morning and found a little tent pitched here. We thought it was one of our mates, but found out it was Lester.
I didn't want to be late.
Slept the night, didn't want to be late.
Daylight saving.
We've had a nice wander over the hill, and Dad's original wishes had been, when he was still living in Wellington before he moved to Wanganui, was that he always wanted his ashes to be spread on the hill. But when he moved to Wanganui, he went back home, and I think Dad in the later years had a few memory problems, and taking him back home to Wanganui, that was his new happy place. And none of the roads had changed, none of the streets had changed. He knew where he was, and the house that I bought him backed onto his old schoolyard, and it was a street next to Honey Street, where he was born and raised with his 8 brothers and sisters. And his brothers were still there, and he went back to his local club, and he was happy. He was very happy, and I spoke to him before the accident happened, actually when he came out for his last trip. And I said, Dad, we've got to have one of these conversations. And I said, you always said you wanted to go on the hill. I said, but now you're home. What would you like? And he sort of said, oh yeah, maybe I do want to be here. So Jeff and I had that conversation, and we were then still pondering as to what should we do. So we decided that we would split his ashes, and we have a plot for him in Aramaho Cemetery, and just diagonally from where Dad is, his sister's there looking on him, and his mum and dad are there as well. And so we came back and unveiled his headstone in Wanganui. And this morning we were up early, and we've had a good walk around the hill, and we went up to the aerial there, and a bit of Dad's there, a bit of Dad's here. And we went down to where the house is, and the boys found where the house is, and there was a flax tree that used to sort of just be there in front. And we've dug a hole, and for anyone that would be able to find it, there's a plaque there, and Dad's down there back home. So I kind of feel like our journey now is complete, that we've put Dad in his 2 happy places. And thank you. Couldn't have had a better day today. We've had absolutely stunning weather. I think most of you are going to come now and join us for lunch at the club. And I just think that before we go, I just need to do this. There's something that we should listen to. Dad would have been sitting somewhere probably around there, doing that final
Over there.
Yeah,
over there where Linda is,
there.
sitting there looking out, doing the final
This is
sign
the
off
real secret of
for
adult
ZLW.
Anyway, I didn't
Last
understand a word
Friday,
of
I
that.
went out with a man. According to his driver's license, he was 50.
Anyway, last Friday I didn't go out with the man that was older than
Did
me.
you learn more? Can I just add one last little note? If it's okay. I am hopefully starting a maritime radio and ham radio museum in Greytown or somewhere on the Wairarapa. And the idea of it is that to collect the history of the marine radio stations, as well as amateur radio and the lighthouse service, and put it together so we don't lose this history. I started a marine radio museum at Aurua, ZLB, when I was manager there, and I started that museum in 1986, and it was officially launched by the Mayor and other dignitaries in 2016. The idea was to preserve the history of Aurua radio. Also, ZL1 ZLD, Auckland Memorial, is it Auckland Radio Memorial Museum and radio station are up and running some time ago, but there's nothing for Wellington Radio, not that I'm aware. So, if anybody has anything that they would like to contribute eventually or anytime, I am very serious about starting something up there to remember not only Wellington Radio, but the incidents that we handled, like the Gothic, the Wahine, the Pacific Charger, the Holmdale, and so on. Mikhail Lermontov, UQTT, I'll never forget.
You just stood.
UQTT. Well, that's one big passenger ship we'll never ever forget because